Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel about Web3 communities. And before we begin, why don't we start with the introduction with you guys?
Hi, I'm Giorgio, community lead at Directive Games. We are the developer behind the City Builders, Civitas, and the Hero Shooter, The Machines Arena.
Awesome. Yeah, my name is Marco Van Den Heuvel. I'm the co-founder and CGO at Merit Circle. And for those of you who are not familiar with Merit Circle yet, we're a Web3 gaming DAO that's largely focused on investments, infrastructure. We have a studio arm, and of course, gaming.
Tell me a little bit more about Directive Games.
Yeah, absolutely. Directive Games was founded roughly 9 years ago. We've always been mostly based in Reykjavik, Iceland, but we also have offices around Shanghai, Singapore, Los Angeles, and yeah, we've always been the forefront of new techs. We started as a VR and AR web game developer, and as soon as Web3 became kind of like the new cool thing, if you pass me the term, we kind of felt like jumping in and figuring out what we can do with this tech in gaming. And so we started building Civitas, is a kind of city builder kind of game. You can think of it, a bit of a civilization on the blockchain, if you will. And the other project is the Machines Arena, is a Hero Shooter. So if you're familiar with games like Team Fortress, Overwatch, pretty much the same, but top-down and very fast-paced and with blockchain elements. We're building that with Sky Mavis. That's the gist of it.
Cool. So let's dive into communities, because it's kind of a weird topic with Web3 in general. How do you? So let me just throw this to you, since you're part of a gaming guild, and that seems to be pretty central to Web3 gaming communities. But I wanted to know kind of your thoughts on how the community aspect of Web3 games is how the landscape is essentially.
Just in general, in terms of like what kind of players there are? Or?
Just I would say the dynamic of how to manage communities for on this perspective of the guild, essentially.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, Merit Circle essentially started as a scholarship guild, which, if you're talking then about community, you have largely people that are looking for incentives, right? They were looking for being able to use our NFTs in different games and being able to play those, whereas they may not be able to do it themselves. And I would say that was very different from how I look to the community side of the Web3 landscape today, where it's kind of this weird mix, right? Kind of what you mentioned too, is you have on one hand, you have stakeholders, people that might have invested in the game, they might have purchased NFTs in the game, and then on the other hand, you have maybe the diehard game enthusiasts that are really there for that game. And so one thing I always find interesting is that when I join a Discord community of a Web3 game, you'll see that mix very clearly, because you'll see people asking about something I've never seen in Web2, for example. Do you still have enough runway to get to the next phase of your game? Or, hey, I use this NFT, when might I be able to use that in the game? Or are you going to use any or add any different utility to this NFT that we might not have seen today yet? And so it's a very interesting landscape that's changing very rapidly from what I mentioned earlier, the scholarship kind of oriented mindset, towards right now the ownership, interoperability, towards what I'm hoping to see a larger shift towards more casual gamers, competitive gamers coming into really it for the gameplay.
Mm-hmm. So from the perspective of a game company, how do you think about Web3 communities and just gaming communities, and how do you merge them together?
Yeah. So first of all, there is a huge difference, between coming from personally from a background of PC and console games, very Western-centric. The first thing you notice also there is a huge difference also in demographics of the audience, meaning that where most Web2 game developers are focused on a Western-centric market. Web3, you see like a lot of markets that are typically not what us Western developers feel of. So like Southeast Asia, South America, Middle East and such. So, different also cultural approach and, languages, obviously. And also the devices used, because, these markets are mostly mobile-centered from what we feel. So, there's also all kind of these considerations with that. And, talking about, also the what Web3 gamers are looking for compared to Web2 gamers, they're mostly after, the value extraction, they can get from these experiences. Whether in Web2, people are just playing for the sake of, entertainment. In Web3, they're also after, getting something out of their time. and that's why we started, with play-to-earn games and such.
How do you balance that then? Because these are two completely different stakeholders ultimately that you have to manage, right? So there are the groups who are more related to like players of the game and who are diehard fans, and I'm assuming casually it kind of spans across both groups, right? And then there are the diehard people who are ultimately just there to understand like value and play more of a DeFi game ultimately. So from your perspective, how do you guys think about managing those two communities and keeping them both kind of engaged and happy?
Right. I think it all boils down to content in the end, both in terms of like tokens as well as game content, meaning that you want to keep people, the gamers engaged with actually interesting content, meaning new maps, game modes, characters, and whatnot. While at the same time, you need to make sure that the other group of people are rewarded for their time, because they don't want to just waste time playing a game. They want to get something out of it. And then at the end of it, those who are most engaged anyway, like some of them are going to be just joining a new season just to get the next skin or NFT skin and whatnot, while others are might be coming back just because they're enjoying their time with it, which is a game after all.
What do you think?
I actually don't have very much to add to this one. I think you have the best insights in that as being a game developer and seeing this live in action. I think for us, we're looking at different companies that we might have invested in that are developing either games or infrastructure and going into their communities and seeing that into action. I mean, I think, you kind of covered a lot there on what we're seeing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is something that I've been thinking a lot about as well. So Web3, there's this like very strange dynamic in Web3, in my opinion, where the projects are expected to airdrop or pay their users to come, which is not something that exists anywhere else if you kind of think about it, right? It's usually the flip version of that, where users come and pay the developers for this. And so what's your thoughts on this? In my mind, this doesn't make any sense in my head. And so please help me grok this landscape essentially to figure out how do we essentially go from that mode back to reality, or do we even need to ultimately?
Well, ultimately, I think the business model there for developers is pretty much just what they can get from each transaction within whatever token they're selling and whatnot. Plus so. I mean, it's just a matter of, it's a trade-off for both the communities, the gamers and the devs, because at the end of the day, we are both here to try to gain something there. Hopefully we're not going to dilute ourselves too much, like by giving more to the play than vice versa, but,
Yeah, I think how I like to think about it is that exact topic is pretty fascinating to me, because if you think about Web3 gaming, then there's two main things here that I find very challenging. I think the first one, if you look at the history of gaming, it always was made easier and easier for people to start playing games. Mm-hmm. So back in the day, for example, you would have to go to an arcade hall, put in a coin, then you're able to play a game. Then years later, you were able to have a console at home and finally be able to play a game at home casually, much more casual than having to actually go out there to an arcade hall, play it. And now we're introducing things like wallets, finance, whereas I may just want to wind down and play a game, not have to think about money for one little time in my life, finally, right? And the other side of it is that in Web3 gaming is also the first time where studios have a lot of money, but they don't have users. Whereas in the history of gaming too, it was usually the other way around. You would see game developers shipping MVPs. They would see, is this game actually a success? They would find traction, build an audience, and that's when the money kind of starts flowing in. And here you saw, especially throughout the past couple of years, I would say it's less so now, massive valuations before a game was even launched, before you were even being able to see anything feasible there other than a concept that was there. And I think right now we're getting to the point where valuations are coming a little bit lower, which is nice for us as investors. But we're also coming to the point where we're now seeing a lot of games finally shipping those early access versions of games. So for people coming in, there's now games that you can actually play and try out, and you can see like, hey, the quality of games is actually going up compared to what we might have seen earlier on. And I think that's headed into the right direction, but whether we're going to tackle those two challenges or not, I feel like we're still in the midst of it, and it's going to be a very interesting one. But
Do you think this was inevitable? Like, if you think about it, it started before blockchains, right? It kind of started with Kickstarter.
Right.
This whole aspect of launching games or promising something and funding it, essentially.
Yeah.
I would say that the Web3 thus far, taking away all the other kind of use cases that are, in my opinion, more interesting, but kind of using that as a fundraising rail in the beginning, it's just a next iteration of that. So do you think this is just inevitable and we'll see the gaming industry essentially just embrace more and more ways to kind of make it more accessible? Because one of the big problems with these AAA games is that it takes so long and it's so expensive, right? And so do you see this as a trend, or do you think this is like more of an outlier?
That's a tricky question. So when I'm thinking about was this inevitable, I don't necessarily think it was inevitable. I think what we have been seeing is, sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
Do you think this trend is here for the long run? Is it inevitable?
Like inevitable funding it up front, you mean?
Yeah, because moving away from this model of, it takes 6 to 8 years for a game.
Oh, right, that was it, yeah, got it back. Yeah, so what we're seeing a lot, and I find that in Web3 too, is there's a lot of attention towards AAA games. People are talking always about the AAA games, and we wanted to see AAA games coming to Web3. But if you're looking at Web2 games, then actually the ones bringing in the most money in total, they're not the the AAA games. They're more of the casual games, mid-core games, things like that, even indie games. And so I think what we're going to see very much here too is that we've now had this first phase where we saw native Web3 studios, if you will, trying to take a piece of the pie by trying to ship a game, promising this, but not necessarily having that Web2 game developer experience that you need to actually build a proper game. And now that we're seeing more, I would say, Web2 studios taking a leap of faith, if you will, into Web3 and starting to add blockchain elements, not trying to reinvent the whole wheel by pushing Web3 in your face, but rather by adding pieces and parts of that make sense in their game. I feel like that's going to ultimately change maybe this model a little bit again, where sure, it might be a little bit more accessible because it might be easier to fund your game. You don't have to necessarily go to traditional stakeholders or publishers, but you can have a crowd also partially source it for you. That's very interesting. I think that's there to stay. But I also think that crowd, those funders, their requirements to fund those games are going to increase as well. They want more transparency. They want more maybe milestone-based investments, if you will. Things like that give them a little bit more of a guarantee that, okay, I'm actually going to see a game come out of life out of this, which is something that we've not always seen in the past couple of years.
Yeah, additionally, I might say that crowdfunding, both in Web2 and Web3, is also a very useful marketing and kind of proving the concept kind of thing. Because even in Web2, there are many companies that even with funding, they go into crowdfunding. Even if they had already funding from investor, they still go to the crowdfunding way just to see if there is an interest in the market actually. And I mean that's obviously even more relevant with Web3 when that directly technically every single gamer is kind of investing into your project, especially if you're selling your tokens up front, before you even have a build there that you can try. So there's definitely much more trying to seek gamers. Faith in your project from the get-go. So definitely not going to disappear as a trend, that's for sure.
So this is something that I've noticed even with games that don't have any Web3 elements. The community aspect of it is getting more and more important. So like And I think a lot of even AAA titles these days are realizing that transparency, all these things that you mentioned, is things that you need in your game. It's just like which parts of it is transparent is a little bit different. Like, so if you take a look at, what's a good example? Blizzard, for example. There has been a big backlash from the gaming community for Diablo 4, but they've responded by opening and having more dialogue, more conversations, right? And so how do we start facilitating, essentially, this kind of conversation with Web3 ultimately? Like, is this how we do it, or do you think there's other ways that you guys are looking into to help give the community a voice for the game developers ultimately?
Yeah, well, I think considering the fact, like in Web3 there is much more of a stake for even the players themselves into the project. Transparency is even more important than in Web2, and I think in a way we are kind of already doing it. I mean, when you see stuff like white papers and all tokenomics out there, it's super important for gamers, and especially gamers that are invested into NFTs and such. And yeah, I mean, you need to have those tools. You need to keep everything transparent regarding, the development, the business side of things. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, just benefit to be very straightforward about your roadmap, what you're building, your shortcomings even, address them as soon as possible. And, at the end of the day, try to have build together with your community, especially since we lived in the age of live ops for a while now. And, you have to be reactive to what your community wants.
Mm-hmm. How do you, sorry, do you have...
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, I think one really good example that I can think of is old school RuneScape. Mm-hmm. When they first released this version of RuneScape, they did that so because there was this massive backlash against RS3 that people found more towards, this went more towards that World of Warcraft kind of game, right? What people weren't necessarily waiting for. And so they released the old school version. Mm-hmm. And something that I found really cool there is they are not blockchain, but they did integrate governance like voting. So people would be voting for what updates they might want to see in the game. Do they want new bosses? Do they want new weapons? Do they want certain skills to be completely different than it is currently? And that is in a game where you're not even, don't have a financial stake in the game. Mm-hmm. In Web3, we're now seeing people that have bought NFTs, that maybe bought tokens, and they feel entitled on a completely different level towards transparency, communication, and having that voice. Mm-hmm. I think something that Web3 studios have to be very careful with is that governance aspect. To what extent, from what period of time are you going to allow people to shape your game? I feel like a game needs to be there at the core level, like the core layers need to be there. You need to have the foundation of being able to play this game, how you envision it as a studio, in place before you can have that voice in the game to do all of those changes. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to do it too early on, you might find yourself in a position where you cannot come back from certain updates you're introduced or certain balancing things you might have done with your NFTs, because they're NFTs, they should be immutable, right? In many people's eyes.
Right.
So if now you made certain promises or did certain things in your game because of the community, and later on you regret it, you might find yourself in a very tough spot. So I think it's a very tricky aspect of gaming, but also, in my opinion, one of the most interesting ones.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm really glad that you brought this up, because the immutability of the blockchain ultimately means that the game developers have to think a little bit more beforehand when they design these games. And that is always a better thing, because there has been a recent trend in games to essentially launch a product that's not fully baked, and their mantra is, let's fix it once it's live, essentially. And while that's a good mantra, the fact that you can fix things, the problem becomes they didn't really think things through. And so the initial experience of the game is not wonderful, and then they pivot. But to be fair, it would have been better if the interactions with the community was already baked in to begin with, and they thought about that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a balancing act on multiple sides. I mean, obviously, as Marco was saying, you have to have an initial idea and everything. You cannot just purely build upon every community desire. Also, because many times that might not be feasible, either for budget constraints or technical limitation, or just straight up not going along with the original design of the game. So it's a balancing act, and kind of would say also in this day and age is I wouldn't say it's impossible to go out there with a game that is fully ready as you wish for do, especially because so many games trying to compete for attention, and the market is getting kind of saturated at this point, and it's very hard to go out there and make sure somebody else with a faster, more scalable team is gonna just take your idea and make it better the day after. So kind of need to be there first in a way. So. It's a balancing act.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. And I want to kind of, now, because there's a game developer on one end, and there is a guild and other kind of services group here, I want to talk about the interaction between you two and the community to begin with. And so maybe, Marco, you can start, and talking about how you interact with, because I am here to just learn a little bit more about this entire dynamic. And so, how do you interact with gamers, and how do you recruit gamers, and how do you interact with games, and how do you all of that? So let's talk about that.
I'll start by saying it's a very interesting mix. Because here you're not trying to build one community, you're actually building a community that needs to be excited about not just one thing, but about many things. And in our case, those are many different games. So one thing we initially had in our Discord server was this mix between DAO members, token holders, and gamers. And we also had our Telegram group with with token holders. We realized that by combining those three into one channel, the conversations kind of were scattered. It wasn't really focused on one thing and what it should be. And so we revamped this whole Discord server towards being gaming only. Something that I've been struggling with, because I'm very much involved on the gaming community side since the beginning of Merit Circle, was that we initially were this scholarship guild that were doing those rentals of NFTs for Axie Infinity and whatnot. And so our core community were thousands of people that had that mindset and were looking for those kind of games. Where what I also said in this panel, we're now looking for more casual gamers, competitive gamers. But if they join a Discord server and the one thing they read about is when am I getting paid or when am I gonna rent an NFT, it's you become alienated or may feel alienated as a gamer very fast. And something I've been working on throughout, I would say, especially the past year with our team, is kind of building up the Discord server from the ground up again through playtesting, early access, giving feedback, focusing over quality rather than quantity, and really trying to track those casual and competitive gamers by hosting events for the different games that we have invested in, but also different games that are now releasing where we're like, dang, this is actually pretty good or a pretty fun game. And we now have a community that is nowhere as large as we had back in the day on that scholarship side. But I dare to say it's a community that I would much rather work with because we're now actually able to give good feedback to game studios and tell them like, hey, this is what we're noticing in our community, or this is what they're talking about. Or even if you talk about highlighting games, we will do those weekly sessions where we stream games or where we release content. And that last part, content, now that we are seeing games finally coming into those early access stages so much, we're actually able to create a lot of content and share that with gamers to hopefully attract people not from Web3, but just gamers, and invite them to us where it's less about economy this, NFT that, more about this game is releasing, do you want a spot to check it out?
How about on the gaming side?
Yeah, I mean, as Marco was saying, kind of the onboarding process is evolving, we're kind of getting into this kind of trend, let's say, of getting rid of all the economics part and kind of hiding that behind the actual game. So, for example, with the Machines Arena, we went from what we like to call a Web 2.5 approach, meaning people jumping into the game have no clue that it's a blockchain-based game unless they want to be interested into that. We have a connect wallet button somewhere there, but do you want to be bothered with that? Yeah, you're gonna have your skins / NFTs within your game account. But if you want to trade them, just can do that afterwards. And there are many other games and communities doing that kind of approach. Even Reddit itself, most people have no idea that those character things you have there are actually NFTs.
Yeah. Avatars, right?
Yeah.
How do you interface a lot with guilds and different kinds of guilds, or is this not something that you do at this time?
Oh, well, it's interesting because Marco is and Merit Circle are directly invested into one of our projects.
Okay.
So we obviously talk.
But like, how do you then think about all the other? There's many guilds, right?
Yeah, no, there is, and I think one of the coolest thing in Web3 compared to Web2 is that there is very little, competition and a lot of collaboration. Like it's very easy to, connect with other developers and gaming communities, DAOs and whatnot, and start. If they see some value in your game and they're interested, because it's fun or because they see potential in the project long term, it gets super easy, to do collaboration. And Marco was saying, like doing game nights or showcasing the game to their communities, and especially important in Web3, considering Web3 gamers are kind of a scarce commodity still, so they're still building up. When you have gaming communities after more games, they're literally building up the Web3 crowd at the moment. So super important for us because it makes it much easier for us to connect with those kind of players rather than just trying to seek them in the general public.
Cool.
So I actually was always wondering about this as well. Where if let's say I go and I join like a Twitch community or a game community in the forum somewhere, traditionally before Web3. Let's say I'm playing a card game. Then it's more likely that there's a lot of cross interaction with other card games in that. But usually there isn't really like a cross between like a card game and like an FPS or something, right? How do you manage this? Because as a guild member, I'm assuming you have people who started as Axie players, right? And as the gaming landscape evolves, your guild members will all kind of start, pushing into all these different spaces.
Yeah.
And so how do you manage this internally to figure out like where to prioritize and what to do essentially?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one thing we did was we soft launched this thing called what we call the gaming platform, and essentially it's basically a content hub where people can learn about different games. One thing we're really looking to do is, well, first of all, of course, we have analytics, but we're going to be implementing certain features where people can sign up for different games or specify which genre they're interested in. And that way we can kind of do different matchmakings where we notify them, hey, there's this new FPS game that was released on our platform. We have written content about it, maybe educational content, maybe just gameplay footage, teasers, whatever you can think of. This matches your interest and they might check it out. In our Discord server, we've been having those different channels with also different genres or different games where we kind of, and that's also the fun thing about quality over quantity, as you're very much involved with your community, you'll start recognizing names and faces and you know which people like which kind of games. Obviously, that's not 100% scalable, but for the time being, by identifying, okay, these kind of people like this, these kind of people like that, maybe for some games there's even geographical, aspects to it that they might be more interested in a casual game,
language,
mid-core game,
right.
Language. All those things is right now, I would say, in its infancy. But they are definitely things we are considering and looking at and trying to slowly map out towards this two-sided platform, two-sided community where you talk back and forward and start figuring that out.
I think one thing that is fascinating in Web3 is that there is a trend of many people that weren't gamers that got into this game just because of Web3, and so there is a lot of people that have absolutely no idea, what's an FPS, what's an RTS, and so on and whatnot. And so I mean, we got to a few events and where we like playtesting TMA, and we found we had a PC build, and there were people that had no idea that they need to put their fingers on the WSD, ASD, keys, and okay, that's interesting, and they knew all games in Web3, all the trends and whatnot, but had no idea how to play this game. Okay, that's interesting. So you also have this this crowd of new gamers, as a matter of fact, that got interested into this entertainment media just because they start to see the value there. Then, of course, obviously you have all gamers that come in there, and Marco was saying you need to cater to them differently because they have different interests. You cannot force people into playing that are into city builders playing hero shooter. We discovered that since we're building both and they have very different crowds. So, yeah.
Well, to be fair though, you can change your city builder into a map generator for
That's
your
true.
shooting game.
That's a very interesting point. Might try something there. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I think that's all the time we have. But thanks a lot for talking about Web3 communities. I think from our perspective, I would like to see a lot more development in this front because I think Web3 people and blockchain people in general think that community is like a solved issue, but I think in gaming it's a way more complicated issue than what people turn out to be. So
Yeah.
cool, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. Have a nice day.
Thank you guys so much.